Okay. Hi, my name is Ines. Welcome to my YouTube channel. This is where we talk about our emotions and safely feel the feels. Today's episode is one that I've been thinking about for a long time. It's something that my guides, especially most recently, have really been urging me to talk about. And I think it'll help shed a lot of light on what is currently going on with the world, with why it feels like our races are separating instead of uniting, why it feels like there's so much conflict and drama going on, and especially why we're talking about decolonizing the mind. And I think anywhere on the internet that you look, there seems to be some sort of drama or some sort of debate. And I do work mostly with my guides. I have kind of been observing and learning with them my entire life. And now it's time for me to actually start pulling in educational evidence. And though I have not yet watched a lot of this guy's videos, there are a lot of clips that I've seen being shared from him, and that is exactly what my guides are telling me. So I have never studied under him. I have never even studied, to be completely honest. This is all information that I have discovered through observation. But in saying that, without having anything to do with him, every time I come across one of his like quick little clips that people are sharing, it's on point with what my guides are telling me. So I'm gonna leave all the information in the link in the description, and you can learn with me. One thing I do know is that the white race, if you will, is one of the last civilizations to exist. So life started in Africa, and then it spread out to the indigenous, to Kemet, or what we now kind of know as Middle East or North Africa, and over to India and to the Eurasias. India is one that's very specific to me because of their spiritual similarities to that of Africa and indigenous. And I just want to clarify that I have had an open channel with Source, the creator, my entire life, and he always told me to learn from his children. And I first thought that it was just to help me avoid religion, but it is so much more than that. So then that brings me to my next point, which is why white people are the last to evolve. Okay, when we start learning about mental health, we start learning about emotions, we start learning that we're not processing emotions properly, and all of this stuff. This is all things that you learn in spirituality. These are all things that, like the inner child, the shadow work, mastering duality, understanding duality, are like the first steps of spirituality. You don't actually get any of these, I call them spiritual abundances, like those special cool little gifts, especially when your crown opens. You don't get any of that until you go through the hard work of getting a hold on your emotions. Energy is emotions. So until you understand and learn about your personal emotions, you don't actually get to learn how to work with energy. Some people like me, they have an open line of using their energy, but if we don't understand what's happening with our emotions and therefore our energy ends up being very scattered, and it actually, for me personally, I found it put a lot more overwhelm on my emotional processing and mental health, and through not understanding the power of energy and the power of emotions, I went through a really hard time with anxiety and depression, dark night of the soul, all of that. It wasn't until this past year that I was very much like, hey, I gotta figure out my spiritual stuff. I know I have some sort of spiritual gifts. I just don't know how much, I don't know how to work with it. So I've got to do all of these steps properly in order to really fully advance in my spirituality. And that is one of the reasons why I created YouTube, is to help people who do want to ascend spiritually, and especially for your mental and emotional health. It all works together. It's all connected. And now we go back to the part where white people are the least evolved. If you look at how long humanity has existed, and if you look at Africa being the first one where civilization did begin, if you take into account that that was during maybe the Ice Age, where the earth itself was changing, you can kind of start looking at how we move from Africa more up north to Europe. By the time that civilization, that humans got to the European level, there's also something very important in there about Earth undergoing her shadow phase. And that's something that I'm still looking into, but I think it's one piece of evidence to help us explain as to why whites never really evolved. The other thing I do find is very important to talk about is conquering, colonization started in Europe and moved its way down. So at the same time, I do feel like God was telling his children, his originals, that there is stuff happening more north of them and that they need to kind of move up and start helping us ascend. I do feel like this is possibly what brought Kemet and Rome together, and then that also was one of the reasons why there was so much violence there. And I think it's because Rome wanted to, I'm not going to say Rome. I do feel like there were some greedy men who wanted to use their own inner knowing or their knowledge to manipulate the masses and kind of take over and live as king or god or whatever. If you look throughout history, if you look at the details of European Dark Ages versus what the rest of the world was doing, and even further back than that, you can definitely you realize that the conquering stage really flourished throughout Europe. And you could also argue that part of the reason why is because being a newer civilization, a newer race, if you will, we never got the chance to fully experience love and compassion the way that our older brothers and sisters did. The older generations, the older civilizations, being from Africa to indigenous until you get to Europe. So while I feel like there's a lot of this divide that's kind of starting with truth being exposed, because we have been lied to, and if you look at what the colonizer did, of course they were going to lie to us to keep us hooked on whatever it is that they wanted us hooked on. Religion also started around the same time that we started learning spirituality, so I do feel like there is, you could also say that religion was created through being taught spirituality, and this is where the greedy person decided, oh, I'm gonna use this to corrupt everybody and I will become their god. Whatever details you want to use, they all paint the same picture. Okay, now throughout, I want to say the mishandling of white generation or white civilization ascension, that is where we get a little stuck. I feel like that's where the whites started to divide, where they wanted to continue spirituality like we were being taught, and this is where like the pagans and the witches kind of come in, because I feel like that is a link to Kemet, therefore Africa, whereas religion looks very down upon this. And religion also, and again, I'm looking at the big picture, I'm not looking at the teeny tiny details right now. And that is also where I feel like religion flourished. So they were able to manipulate those that were using witchcraft and spirituality and essentially claim that we were aligned with the devil, or however they would say it to us. And I think this ultimately gave them power. If you understand how spirituality and energy work, the manipulation is quite simple to understand. You're dealing with the whites, for example, not for example, but the white civilization is basically split into two. One of them is living and peaking in ego and greed and selfishness, while the other one is trying to reach love and compassion. And this is where those clashes happen. This is where the wars white on white started to happen. And this is where we were ultimately forced to let go of and separate ourselves from God's true religion of spirituality that was being taught to us by our neighbors. And of course, then you can kind of go into what happened with the pagans, the witches, and the Irish. And this is all stories that are being very much talked about in my social spaces right now. I know there's a lot of other stories that are currently being talked about and uncovered, so there's just so much more to come. So, if you want to specifically look at colonization, they targeted all spirituality, whether it was tribes or cities or an entire continent of the Americas, Great Turtle Island. If you look at that, and if you look at how violent colonization was and how much they kind of took over, you can see how much our emotional intelligence and evolution was actually stalled. So while a lot of these cultures gate kept their spiritual practices, all for good reason, they were able to continue ascending and finding that grounding and continuing connection to source and creator, whereas the whites didn't get that chance because it was like they got swept in by what I call the parasite. What I mean by the parasite is that virus that makes you thrive on ego, on greed, on hate. That is what I call the virus. It is predominant in whites because they're the last generation to start evolving and ascending, and they were stalled in their evolution, therefore creating even more of an environment where this parasite would thrive, versus our neighbors, our brothers and sisters who existed many generations before us. It didn't affect them as much because they didn't have the environment internally to allow the parasite to thrive. To them, it was like shadow thoughts, but to us, it was like, oh my God, is this our God? And a lot of us, through the fear and pain that we lived for hundreds of years, we eventually started to believe that, yes, this is our God, okay? And now we go back over to the colonization of the Americas. So, one thing I do want to mention, I'm a huge supporter of land back, and honestly, the most basic, simplest reason is because there are men who thrive on the world dying. So I know that's kind of harsh and mean to say, and it's kind of like, holy crap, Dennis, you're crazy. But hear me out. Capitalism, colonization, conquering, colonization, capitalism. It's all the same thing. It's essentially a group of men living like gods and kings while the rest of us suffer. One of the biggest reasons why I support land back internationally around the world is the simple fact that these greedy men have created a capitalistic system for us to live in, and it only benefits them. Our soil doesn't even have enough nutrients to grow proper food for us. And that is something that was told to me by my family doctor. So I'm not saying that there's absolutely no nutrients, blah, blah, blah. However, because of the agriculture of natural order that the indigenous have done, that basically stopped once capitalism started, that is one of the biggest reasons and issues that we as a human race will be having going forward. And I support land back because I want to get back to earth, get back to natural order. The men who play the capitalistic game, they don't care. It's unfortunate to find out that the people you thought cared about you don't actually care, but they don't. They just want money. And there is so much proof out there on social media to see that exactly. Now it's just a matter of, do you want to see that or not? Going back to emotional evolution, right now is our time to purge bad emotions. I am someone who's very intelligent. I have a lot of inner knowing. I'm mentally, crownly gifted, and I still fall into the traps because they're just so normalized. It's everywhere. It really is. So I don't want anybody feeling shame or guilt for falling into the trap of colonization. And you guys have to remember that the way that the violence and fear worked 400, 500, 700 years ago, we were all victims at some point. Obviously not in the same sense as what happened, the genocides that happened to the indigenous and throughout the slave trade, but this is specifically speaking to white people. I think a lot of us too now, through going through therapy and just kind of paying more attention, we're realizing what is going on, something's up. And once you start healing mentally and emotionally, you start learning more about spirituality, and you start realizing how much religion corrupted us and messed us up. And that is why I don't want anyone to feel bad. I don't want anyone who's white especially to be like, well, now they're being racist towards me, blah, 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 blah. The truth is we all suffered at the hands of the same colonizer. And that is where I bring up capitalism. We're still under that colonized system, and now we just call it capitalism. The words are different, the method is the same, if not upgraded. What I highly encourage all white people to do is, instead of pointing the finger back at yourself, just write down the things that you don't like that exist in our world. What are some of the things that you wish your kids 100, 200 years in the future would say, I am so proud that my grandmother, that my grandfather, that my great-great-great aunt, whatever, I am so proud that they chose to do that because it benefited us 400 years from now. When you start looking at things that way, you start realizing that it's really the people versus the leader, and our leaders are not doing a good job of leading us to prosperity. And the people that should be in charge, that can and will lead us to prosperity for all, are the ones who are continuously trying to help Earth, the ones who are continuously talking to us about why we need to pay attention to Earth, about being calm in our mind, about finding love and relaxing. And regardless of what white people want, this is New Earth. And if we want to live in it, we have to really learn about our own emotions, learn how to process them, start there, and then learn more about emotional intelligence and spiritual ascension. Emotional intelligence and spiritual ascension, they work together, they cross over a lot, and you could argue that they are the same thing. However, the process and the practice to get there does differ, and some people need to just learn about the basics of emotional intelligence before they even get into the spirituality. Okay, so that was a shocker for white people. We have a lot of work to do in regards to ascending to get us to 5D. A lot of the melanated kids are already in 5D, but we have a lot of work to do. So journal about your emotions, talk to your emotions, and make sure to always think 400 years in the future, because everything that we're doing now is going to have an effect 400 plus years into the future. So don't ever think about just yourself at just this time, because that is the colonizer mindset. And start thinking more like the indigenous that work with this earth. Start looking at how they plan for hundreds of years in the future, and they always think about others. That's one big thing I want to mention. Not once, when they've claimed land back, not once have they talked about, I'm sure jokingly in private they have, but not once have they said, if we get land back, all of you Europeans are getting kicked out, blah, 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 blah. Not once have they said. All they've been saying is we want land back so that we can take care of the earth, so that it doesn't die, so that generations, hundreds of years from now, have access to resources, and that humanity continues to thrive and survive. And one thing that bothers me about white people, and this could be the first thing that you're journaling on, instead of agreeing in that sense, you automatically make it a racial issue. You automatically point the finger and you say, well, now you're being racist towards white people. Not once during any of their experience did they talk about how much they hated white people until white people started talking about, well, now you're being racist. And then they had to go and start educating us on what racism actually is. And anyways, as a white person, I am tired of these comments. I am tired of people denying the past, of what happened, and mostly denying the fact that we all deserve a better future. So you can either hold on to that egotistic, greedy, white supremacy shit, or you can understand that what has been done to all of us is not okay and we need a better future. Simple as that. You don't have to look into the details until you're ready, but for now, you need to realize that the people saying they're taking care of us are actually destroying us even more. Yeah. Anyways, I will be doing further parts to this as we go on. If you have any questions, especially if you're triggered or offended by anything I said, please leave comments. These are conversations that we need to be having. These are difficult conversations, and I know, because as good as I am at having conversations, these topics are difficult for me to talk about. Even though there's evidence coming out, it's still one of those things where you kind of do feel guilty for what your race has done, but you have to realize that you can be part of the solution and not the ongoing problem. And that is the decision that God is literally forcing us to make right now. And if you want to be a good little white person, just listen. Don't say anything. Ask polite questions. Understand the pain that they've gone through the oppression that they've gone through, and honor and respect that, and try and do better. Okay, I love you guys. Have a good day. Bye.